Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. It is 2:05 p.m. The session is set to go until 3 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may watch or follow us through the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. To the left is Commissioner Gary Edwards. Today we have Jennifer Walker for our Public Works Director, covering as our county manager. And we also have our new Assistant County Manager, Rob Gelder, joining us for this meeting, and Joshua Cummings, our Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, to discuss the Thurston 2045 Scope of Work Briefing follow-up. So Josh, would you like to introduce staff who are joining us today?
Sure. We've got Chris Chapeau, our Planning Manager for Community Planning. And it looks like that's all from CPED. We also have our Economic Development Manager joining, which is great to have her here as well, Jenica Machado. And then online, we have Maya Teeple, Senior Planner, who is the lead planner for this topic, as well as Tasha Knight and Leah Davis. Thank you. And thank you for
This is informational, but we'll be following up for consideration for the board next Tuesday for an action.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in real quick with a reminder that this is a success in terms of timing. The last time we did our update for the comprehensive plan, we were years behind. And the work that the community planning staff has done to get this train back on the track is really laudable. I appreciate the staff work that's gone into this, as well as the Planning Commission's efforts in providing their feedback and input. And then the Board of County Commissioners continuing to provide clear direction on next steps. So previously, the last time we did this, we were years behind. Now, in this new update, we're just right on schedule. So hoping to stay on schedule as Jennifer, as Director Walker relayed, hoping for a decision coming Tuesday so we can keep this train on the track and make sure that the timing continues to work for the community. But this, from my perspective, is a huge success in the efficiency that the board has asked CPED to implement over the past few years. So great work to staff, and I'll hand it over to Chris and Maya to take it away.
Actually, I'll just hand it off to Maya. This is a lot to get through and we'd like to get started.
Great, thank you. I am sharing my screen, so there should be a PowerPoint visible to everyone now. Thank you, Maya Teeple, Senior Planner with Community Planning, and today we are following up our discussion on the Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update to develop the scope of work for that project. Today's briefing, I'll give some background, which we went over at the last briefing on March 1st. I'll provide an overview of the draft scope of work and all of the required and optional elements. And we are requesting direction from the Board of County Commissioners on the scope of work. At the briefing today, as Jennifer Walker stated, we will have a follow-up time at the agenda setting meeting next week on the 18th. So understanding that we don't expect to get that direction from the board today and continue that discussion at agenda setting next week. A little bit of background about the comprehensive plan and the periodic update. So Thurston County, along with all other jurisdictions that plan under the Growth Management Act in Washington State, are required to periodically update their comprehensive plans, and that occurs on a 10-year cycle. That's a recent change. It used to be every 8 years. Now it's every 10 years. And what that update does is it updates the comprehensive plan for consistency with state law and also takes into consideration changes in our plan and changes in our local community. So we go through our comp plan and also our development regulations to make those updates. It plans for the next 20 years through 2045, and with that we are updating our population projections, our building projections, housing projections, and it ensures that we're compliant with any recent changes in state law. It's not a full repeal and replace, so we do have a comprehensive plan. It's updated annually, and the structure is really there. It's also not a full revisioning of the plan. So the basis of the plan withstands. We're just going in and updating as needed. And this periodic update is due June 30th of 2025. So it does take a while to complete, which is why we are coming before you now. So we have a couple of years to get through the periodic update. A little bit of background about the differences of amendments that we consider at Thurston County. So there are two main pathways to updating our comprehensive plan. The first is the annual amendment process, and this is the most frequent type of amendments that we see here at Thurston County fall through this annual amendment process. This is the changes that come to you in the docketing process that are citizen applications or planning commission recommendations or staff recommendations sometimes, and they most often are site-specific and land use and rezoning requests, but they can also be smaller policy changes or more focused topics like the agriculture update is considered an annual amendment. We take those applications on an ongoing basis and we bring them to the board early each year for their consideration of what they want to add to our work plan. And then a 2-year docket is set and we begin working on those amendments. As the board knows, they don't necessarily get done in a single year, but we can update our comprehensive plan once per year. The periodic update, which is a required update under state law, is further out, so every 10 years. And that's kind of the bigger update to do all of the population changes, all of the building projection changes, and the real big data update into the comprehensive plan. Our last periodic update we completed in 2019. That was actually due in 2016, but we got a little bit of a late start on it. And as the director of CPED mentioned, we're on track. This is due in 2025, so we're starting this process now, recognizing that it takes a couple years to get through. So what is the comprehensive plan? This is really the guiding and visionary document for Thurston County, and it sets the stage for how we plan over the next 20 years. That's not to say it's set in stone for the next 20 years, because we do go in and update it frequently, but we are setting the guiding principles for how and where development in the county occurs. And there are 13 planning goals under state law that we're required to balance when we do comprehensive planning. And it's really a balancing act. You know, some of these are competing goals, and the list is here. We have to protect the environment. We also have to ensure property rights and economic development. So these are all the considerations that the Planning Commission and the board takes into play when we're reviewing the comprehensive plan and the changes as part of the periodic update. Thurston County's comprehensive plan has 13 chapters. Most of these align with the elements required under state law. We have land use chapter, natural resources, transportation, utilities, economic development, natural environment, recreation and open space, historic resources, health, and then our amendments, glossary, and kind of our informational chapters. There are a couple of appendices as well that our comprehensive plan has that are mostly informational and reference out to other documents. So diving into the scope of work, I will review the required and optional updates that are included in the draft scope of work that was attached as part of this packet, and then I'll go over the Planning Commission's recommendation on these items. So the draft scope of work that is included in the packet today was developed based on a couple things. The first being the Department of Commerce critical areas and planning checklists, which outline all of the recent changes in state law. So we go through those checklists, we identify what we're already meeting, we don't need to make any changes, and then what areas we might need to do some further research and what areas we will definitely need to make changes. And those form the basis of what updates we will need to do as part of the periodic update. Additionally, we conducted a survey in late 2022 to identify the main community priorities. We include some items that are anticipated changes in state law, maybe not required right now, but could be in the future. And we also consider local trends in Thurston County. Going over our written public comment, this is in addition to the responses that we got on the 2022 survey. We received over 120 written public comments that were specific to the scope of work. And some of the items that those comments touched on are including the Planning Commission in the scope of work process, which we did include the Planning Commission, and we have a recommendation from them for the board to consider today. Supporting a robust community engagement effort and outreach effort to underrepresented groups. That is something that we are striving to do as part of our public participation plan. Improving goals around farmland and preservation. That's an update that will fall under our natural resources element, which is a required component of this update. And we've added some language in there just to reassure the community that we'll be taking that on under the required elements. Updating the plan to meet housing needs. So there have been some major changes in state law around housing goals and how we allocate for those goals and plan for housing needs in our jurisdiction. And that is a required update that we will be including as part of the scope of work automatically. And then addressing racial disparities. Again, that's a new change under state law that we're required to consider with this periodic update. So that will automatically be folded in. Those are the comments we received from the public that will fall under some of the required elements. So all of those on the left side of this slide are addressed. Some of the comments we received that either fall under optional elements that the board will have the opportunity to provide direction on today or at the Tuesday agenda setting next week, or are not included as any sort of optional element, and the board could request that we add that, are including climate mitigation and resiliency into our comprehensive plan, adding in environmental justice priorities, including measurable metrics, including rights of nature and land use decisions, including a mid-cycle check on the scope of work, and then considering updates to the countywide planning policies. And the countywide planning policies fall through a separate process. So should the board not include that in the scope of work, that does not limit the county from making changes to those along the way as we go through the periodic update process. We can always come back to our countywide planning policies. Required updates. These are the updates that are needed to meet changes in state law and bring our plan up to speed with changes in our planning documents. And here's the list of required updates. So all of these we will automatically go in and do as part of our periodic update. Of course, there's a lot of pieces to each of these, but this is the list of the main themes. So we go in and we update our land use element, our natural resources element, housing, capital facilities, utilities, the rural element, which falls in both land use and natural resource chapters, transportation, parks and recreation, land use and zoning corrections, our joint plans that have not been complete as of this year, and then development regulations that are required to meet changes in state law. And there are a few changes that we anticipate needing to make as part of that. The optional updates, and there are 6 of them being considered by the board as of now in the draft scope of work, are updates that are not required to meet state law or changes in state law, but they might add value to the plan and could be folded into this periodic update. They're based on community priorities, they're based on the responses we got in the survey and also written comments that we received, and anticipated changes in state law and local trends that we're seeing in Thurston County. And those include an implementation plan, a future land use update incorporating the findings from the countywide industrial land study, a climate change element, the economic element, and the health element. And I will go through each one of those just briefly to give a recap of what each is. So the implementation plan, it would be probably a new appendix, and that would develop a plan of action for our goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. So providing specific metrics that we can use to measure how we are meeting our goals and policies. There are new changes to state law that were recently passed either in 2021 or 2022 that require the county submit a 5-year progress report after our next comprehensive plan is adopted. So this implementation plan, while it's not required, it will really set the stage and help us with that future work and the progress reporting requirements that we need to do. The future land use update. This is a optional update that would update our future land use map to provide broad general categories that multiple zoning designations fall into. Right now we have a 1-to-1, so your rural residential resource 1 to 5 is the same land use and zoning. If we were to do this update, we would potentially have, just as an example, one residential zone land use that multiple residential zones fall into, like 1 to 20, 1 to 10, and 1 to 5. And what that does is it results in a procedural change for how some types of zoning changes are processed. So they would go through a hearing examiner process, a judicial peer review, and that alleviates some cost burden and some time to the process associated with those. That's not saying that all requests would go through that process. If someone wants to go from residential to industrial, that would still probably require a legislative change to our comprehensive plan. And so that would still need to go through the docketing process, be reviewed with the Planning Commission, and come to the Board of County Commissioners for a final decision. But this is based on the local trends we're seeing in Thurston County and would mostly result in a procedural change and really set a vision for land use in the county. The next optional update is to incorporate the findings from the countywide industrial land study. The countywide industrial land study is a currently docketed item, and we do have a consultant working on that study right now, and we expect to get some final results from that towards the end of this year. So the timing would probably be right if we stay on track with that contract. And this would incorporate any findings from that study into the periodic update of the comprehensive plan. This would probably pair very well with a future land use update, and it might include changes to land use, zoning, or our development code. So there are several industrial zoning designations in the development code, and we might get some recommended changes out of that study as part of that. This study has been a priority of the community, and we expect that if this is added, there's probably going to be a robust public engagement component to it. The climate change element is another optional update. This is not currently required under state law, but there are some legislative bills in right now, and it may be required in upcoming years. And this builds off existing work in our comprehensive plan and also from the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. So we do have a little bit of climate information across our comprehensive plan, but this would really add to that and make it more robust and address mitigation and resiliency, adding policies in for that. It would also include a greenhouse gas inventory and estimate and hazards planning. And this was identified as a high priority of the community, not only through the survey late last year, but also through written public comment. There is model guidance from Department of Commerce on the climate change element. So should the board wish to add this, we would be following that model guidance that Department of Commerce is working on developing. The economic element, we do have a economic chapter in our comprehensive plan. This was last updated in 2019, and we contracted out with the Economic Development Council to complete that work. This optional update would review and revise that chapter based on changes in trends and recent work in the community. And finally, the health chapter is the last optional update. That again had an update in 2019 with that comprehensive plan update, and this would just review and revise based on any new information. The Planning Commission did review and provide a recommendation on the optional updates that are included as part of the draft scope of work. And what the Planning Commission noted prior to making their recommendation on each item is that it's important to have every chapter open, even if there is not a full update for that chapter. For example, having the economic chapter open, even if we don't allocate funds to contract out and complete a full review and revision of that chapter. And so going through their recommendations, the implementation plan, there were 8 in favor and 0 against. The future land use update, 6 in favor, 2 against. Countywide industrial land study and incorporating those findings, 7 in favor and 1 against. Climate change element, 7 in favor and 1 against. Economic element, 5 in favor, 3 against, and health element, 5 in favor and 3 against. For the board's consideration is budget and allocation to the required and optional updates. So we do expect that for the required updates, it will require about 2.5 full-time staff over the course of 2 years and roughly $690,000 estimated for professional services funding. For the optional updates, we estimate just under another full-time employee staff to manage all 6 of those optional updates and an additional $220,000 for professional services. So for everything combined in the draft scope of work that is part of the board's packet today, that's around 3 full-time staff and $910,000 for professional services. We do expect to get grant funding through the state, so there is funding through state legislature for these periodic updates in the amount of $700,000. That application period should be opening halfway through this year, probably in June, and we'll be applying when that does open. So the additional professional services dollars that we would be requesting from the board would be around $210,000. Going through the optional updates, the amount that of these that the board wishes to take on would not only impact the dollars that we're requesting for professional services, but also the number of staff that would be available to work on other docket items and those individual site-specific land use requests or development code changes. The implementation plan is the only optional update that we expect to do completely in-house. Everything else we would be asking for professional services dollars, and then staff would be facilitating incorporating those changes into the plan and also the public process with that. The short-term timeline, we've been working on the scope of work since early this year. We reviewed this with the Planning Commission and had an introductory briefing with the board in March. In March 15th, we received a recommendation from our Planning Commission, and today on April 12th, we're reviewing the scope of work in the Planning Commission recommendation. We do request direction from the board as soon as they are able, and once you have all the information that's necessary, leading up to adopting a scope of work by resolution in May. And that adopted scope of work that we adopt by resolution will be used when we apply for state funding and grant funding in July of this year. And the overall timeline, so right now we're still scoping the update. As soon as we have a final scope of work adopted by resolution, we'll begin initial outreach and internal review on specific elements of the chapter that are included in that, and that'll take approximately a year. That'll include an RFP for consultant work if there are professional services dollars. And Planning Commission review, we expect to begin in spring of next year and go through fall of next year. And then the board's review will begin in fall of 2024, going through June of 2025 with that final action no later than June 30th of 2025. And so the next steps are requesting direction from the board on which optional updates to include in the scope of work. And there are 6 of them that are listed here, and I'm available for any questions. I'll stop sharing this presentation.
So just to tack on real quick, this packet of information is really the useful piece. It's got the Planning Commission's recommendation, as Maya went over. It has the draft scope of work based on the Planning Commission's recommendation and the comments that we received listed with the name and the comment provided. Also, I'd mentioned that this afternoon we received a letter from the Associate Development Organization, the Thurston EDC, that we'll email to the Board of County Commissioners for your consideration before next Tuesday.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions now. Commissioner Edwards.
Let's see, Maya, you said something about the economic element was contracted out, I think, when you were giving your presentation. Who was that contracted out to? You made mention of something, but I didn't get it.
Yep, we contracted with the Economic Development Council to complete that update.
And on several of these other ones that you're commenting on, the 3+ FTEs and the $1 million that you're referring to, is that over that 2-year period? Is that for our staff and what our staff's gonna be paid, or is that for contracting out with a group, say, similar to EDC or some other professional group?
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Edwards. So the 3 full-time employees would come from our staff that are already hired, employed, and funded through general fund. The $910,000 that we're asking for would all go towards professional services funding. So that would be your players like the Economic Development Council, any sort of planning firm that, submits a bid for an RFP, and that monies would go to a contract with a third-party consultant.
So the professional services is not salary.
I guess we don't have, I don't know, the best record for getting things done quickly, whether it's gophers or whatever. I mean, it's a bureaucratic process. It takes, quite a while to get things done. And I'm concerned about, are we writing a novel, or can we do all this more on a synopsis or Reader's Digest version, make it very short and succinct? And the reason for that is during the period of time that this was going to be affecting the county, we're going to have new commissioners come and go. We're going to have people that, commissioners that change their mind about this or that. And I'd just rather see us do a very scaled down version, so we're not tying up that much time of our staff or professional staff on how they're proceeding and the dollars that we're spending. So that's kind of where I'm at. I just see us kind of being overzealous. We have to follow the rules that the state has laid out, but I don't think it has to be more than a Reader's Digest or, some process to keep it down to a manageable process, I guess, the best I can put it. I mean, we don't have a good history. We had Tesla want to do business with us a couple of years ago. The word's out there that Thurston County isn't the most friendly place for business to be conducted. And I'd like to change that somehow by expediting what we're doing. And I think we could do it with good quality. So that's just kind of my initial take on how we might proceed. I'm not saying don't proceed. I'm saying let's try to do the best job we can with a minimal amount of investment, because new commissioners are going to be on board. We're going to have 2 more next year for sure. And then after that, we could have a couple more. So they'll all have different agendas at some point. Let's not make this an encyclopedia. Let's make it so we can change it pretty quick.
Your input is acknowledged.
Commissioner Munster.
Okay, you said today, and you said at the previous briefing, that health and economic chapters have been pretty well overhauled. It was implied by that that's a lower priority from staff perspective. That's what I read from the comments. Planning Commission voted favor, but it was closer, 5-3. I'm pretty familiar with the comp plan in terms of how it addresses land use issues. I'm less familiar with what it says about health. We've had a pandemic since the last time that we what's in that chapter? And I mean, it's kind of hard to think that whatever we did in 2019 is perfectly adequate today, given everything that's happened in the health, but I don't know exactly what the health chapter intends to achieve. Is it the health implications of land use, or is it just something kind of separate related to health?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the health chapter mostly considers the effect of the built environment on health and impacts from that. And it does go through certain health indicators, but things like water quality, water quantity, air quality, um, accessibility and walkability of certain lands. And then there's a little bit of food access in there and tobacco use in there. So it covers it pretty generally. With the last update, a lot of what was done, aside from updating the statistics in that chapter, was incorporating new information from Thurston Thrives. But you're right, there has been a pandemic that has happened since the last update. We're unsure of how much of that is existing in the new planning documents already. And we did reach out to Public Health and Social Services and did not get a response on if there's a strong need to update that chapter as of now.
One of the public comments that I read had said, was talking about we should update our vision statements. And I guess my question is, you said that this is not a repeal and replace, it's just kind of an update. Is there a point, is that how it is every 10 years? Or is there a point where we're supposed to kind of go back and overhaul our vision and all that stuff? Is this not the right time for that, or something like that could be done at any time?
Something like that would be appropriate for a periodic update. However, the level of public engagement that's associated with our complete revisioning of the comp plan is significantly more than what we're planning for and expecting to do with this update. We do have a pretty robust public outreach plan, so we may get information that we could use in updating those statements without the board directing us to do a full revisioning. But that would fall into kind of the public engagement and the time associated with that. So
And then I couldn't help but see slide 26, which mentions the salmon recovery and budget elements, which salmon recovery is obviously was based on the questions that I had about a suggestion that I had heard about why aren't local regional salmon recovery plans woven in somehow, incorporated by reference, or somehow incorporated in local comprehensive plans. And my notes from the last briefing said that staff would kind of think about that or whatever, and it looks like you did and created a slide, but we didn't talk about it. So could we talk about that?
we sure can talk about that. This slide was included just based on your ask at the last briefing, and I kept this in here in case we wanted to bring it up today. So the salmon recovery element, this would be an optional update that the board could choose to include, and it would include revisions throughout the plan to update our policies related to salmon recovery and include a strategy to achieve net ecological gain. So currently, the challenge with including a salmon recovery element is there is not currently a legislative requirement, and there are a few different bills that are existing in the legislature right now that would add voluntary updates to the Growth Management Act, not necessarily required updates. And each of those bills has different requirements. So without a lead bill going through the legislative process and model guidance from Washington State Department of Commerce, it would be really hard to make the updates in the plan that are consistent with a potential future bill we could see adopted. So we could do these changes and then have to go back and make more changes or make the updates again. The other piece of a salmon recovery element is that both of the bills in legislature have separate review processes that fall outside of the periodic update process. So they would either require a additional review process with Department of Fish and Wildlife or with something that is going to be called a salmon recovery technical panel. And there's just extra time that's associated with those steps. So for budget, for a salmon recovery element, we estimate this is a similar push as a climate change element, and possibly more because of the additional process associated with that. So probably around $85,000 for professional services to complete that. And with a contract, we'd probably do a small amount of staff to manage that contract and incorporate it throughout the plan.
Follow up on Commissioner Mentor and the salmon. I'm curious, on the salmon issue, we have got a history of prioritizing this whole salmon recovery. We took action before the court ever mandated action, and we've been taking that action ever since. And I wonder why we, again, would have to boil that down so tight when we could refer to our past history and just say we're gonna continue on that same vein to solve this problem for the community. So, I mean, I appreciate where the commissioner's going on this, because he's on that salmon recovery group, and I understand it completely. But I just don't want staff to put in a crazy amount of time when we're ahead of the game already as far as doing what we have been doing right along, and I'd like to capitalize on that for the benefit of this plan. And I don't know, have a preamble in there about our history of what we've been doing, and we intend to do it. But again, it comes back to where I'm trying to consolidate this into a shorter version that does not take as much in the time of bureaucratic process. So just on that, I do have some other comments, but not on that.
So my concern is a little bit less with getting out in front of some bill that may or may not get passed, or, you know, net ecological gain has not been adopted, but I just want to make sure we're not creating a vision, development vision for this county that's out of sync in some way with the currently adopted regional salmon recovery plan. So it's really, for me, about consistency at a minimum. Whether that requires all the things you described, I'm not sure. But I think it has to be part of the process, of the analytical process of, you know, the way we develop, the way we vision development in this county in the next 20 years is gonna directly impact, you know, a lot of the things that affect riparian areas, salmon habitat, a lot of the different plans and efforts being made across Puget Sound. So those just need to be in sync, is what I'm saying. If the legislature wants to pass a new bill and give us a voluntary way to go further, then I'll probably support that. But, you know, that'll be a discussion for a later time. But I'm just looking for, these issues not to be siloed, because I think they're quite overlapping and quite connected. And just like climate change, the same argument can be made.
Is there any chance, as a follow-up to that, that we could include that salmon recovery plan from the Salmon Recovery Council that you're representing, and just include it in ours, not reinvent a whole new statement?
That's what I was asking. Simpler is good. I'm not looking for more complexity, more expense, and more staff resources, but just so that we are, as leaders of this county who are trying to vision out development plan, we're showing that we see that connection, and so I don't know exactly how these things work. If documents can be incorporated by reference, that was something that was made, it's kind of thrown out in that way when I first heard the idea. And I was throwing it to staff to sort of think about how that might work.
And so we do include goals and policies around habitat protection and critical area protection, and that feeds into the salmon recovery piece. We could certainly add, looking at the salmon recovery plan, rather than having a whole new salmon recovery element, we could probably add that as a small piece of the natural environment element, which is already a required update, and just making sure that we take a look at that salmon recovery plan if that's at the will of the, at the direction of the board.
The other one on here, this same slide is budget, and I don't quite remember what that was about. Could you remind us?
It's the budget for that topic.
Oh, that's the budget for salmon recovery. It wasn't a separate, okay. Got it, estimate.
But that, I mean, this is if we took a full look at this as an element, as opposed to what we just discussed, referencing it by document in the natural environment topic. So this would be, if we really took a hard look, I think that we can go forward on the path that I think at least two commissioners are recommending, reference by document.
I'd be curious, you know, if there's any other counties that have trying to take a look at this. Maybe not, but that would add into.
Maybe a topic change, I'm in agreement. But things like ADUs and work within the UGA of our municipalities and stuff like that. I did bring up the other day to my seatmates that I felt that as we move into an infrastructure of installing charging units, for an example, that we try to coordinate with our other jurisdictions, so we don't have a bunch of mishmash of, we do it one way, they do it another way or something, including charging or charging like with credit card or whatever, not just charging the vehicle. But I'd like to see something included in there because it talks about housing that, I mean, obviously, the Growth Management Act is expecting growth in the UGA, and I don't know exactly what the legislature passed this year as a final passage on building on lots. I don't know, you know, some of the municipalities, now they're gonna have 2 homes on a little lot, that kind of thing, but they have sewers where we have individual septic systems and stuff. And I don't know how that finally finished out. But I don't see why in the UGA, we can't turn a lot of that planning over to those municipalities so that they can implement what they want to implement, because it's going to be part of that municipality soon anyway. And I don't know what soon is, but as growth goes on. And so why should we have our folks spending a lot of time and energy trying to impose, I don't know if it's our point of view or what, because we're going to all try to follow the law, I'm sure. Why not allow Lacey and hence builders to approach one governmental entity to get the job done? So we could expedite building, we could make it more affordable and get it off of our back, so to speak, because it's gonna be in the municipality at a future date. So I'd like to see things like that put in there that have us obviously trying to, I don't know, think smarter, think outside the box or what.
Isn't that what the joint plan is aiming to do? The ones that we're working currently, it's on the docketing process.
Kind of.
That's correct.
Kind of, but we're not completely there. I know Commissioner Mentor had an idea, I think, yeah. So.
One more thought. Sorry, my wheels are turning on the salmon, so, could I ask that Maya connect with Raya 13 lead entity coordinator, who's really our regional expert on the salmon recovery chapter? That's Amy Hatch-Winica, about what elements in that chapter might be relevant to a comp plan. I think she would be able to brainstorm that and give you guys some good ideas, and then maybe those are separate, or maybe they could work together.
Did you hear that, Maya? Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner.
So my questions,
Shall be a chair.
So I guess I'll start with the incorporate countywide industrial land study findings, right? And I know that's currently in the docketing process. We haven't seen the results of that. So I'm just wondering how that's going to work out for something that's currently in the workings. The board hasn't even seen the results. It hasn't gone through a public process yet. So how is that going to implement into this?
Yeah, so we're expecting a report from the consultant by the end of this year, and then those findings, either options or if it's one proposal, that proposal would be incorporated in the comp plan and go through the public process alongside the rest of the periodic update. So it would go through full planning commission and board review. We would probably do a check-in with the board before we begin incorporating that information into the comprehensive plan. But if the timing stands as it is and we see those results towards the end of the year, we would just fold it into the public review process as part of the periodic update.
And just to confirm, the Board of County Commissioners would have the final word on what within that industrial land study gets rolled into the comprehensive plan.
Yep.
So you don't have to lift the whole thing and set it in. You, the planning commission, and then the board get to decide what gets included in the comp plan. And so this is a placeholder, if you'd like to do that in the future. You're saying, let's have this chapter for the pages to fill with information later.
Okay, one of the things that has been talked about, especially in the legislature, has been in regards to equity strategies. And it was one of the big items I know with the Puget Sound Regional Council, and they have their strategies laid out, and you know, and they split it up into displacement risk, and so, and just different aspects of that equity strategy, right? From housing to climate change to agriculture to just different aspects of it. And so I'm wondering what's gonna be the equity strategy, not just in the outreach aspect, but just as we're setting up this plan.
Maya, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Commissioner Mejia. So the equity piece of the update is going to be pretty robustly reviewed as part of the housing element. And so that will take into consideration equity and racial displacement in terms of housing. We hope to get some more strategies around that for the other elements through that public outreach that we'll be doing later this year. And part of that may include having some of that work done by a consultant through those professional services dollars.
A little bit. I'm trying to, so I know that, I'm not sure if it was a legislative change that happened, that basically now there has to be an equity strategy. I'm looking at Rob, since he sits on LSU.
I had notes in here that I read this morning that, to that effect. I'm not finding them at this moment, but my notes said that racial equity was added as a required element now in some fashion.
Right, and that is directly linked with the housing element, right? So it's racial disparity and equity was added as a piece that has to be reviewed as part of our housing element, and that's what Maya was talking about just now.
Okay, and then agriculture is another big piece that we've been hearing about. And the, you know, the loss of farmland, I think we've been hearing our Ag Advisory Committee come in here every year stating that point, the loss of farmland is, you know, it's alarming here in Thurston County. And so I'm wondering where that fits in and what, and these scopes that have been laid out.
Yep, so the agriculture piece of this is directly linked to one of the required updates, and that's the natural resources element. We have been hearing that in comment from the community, so we called out agriculture and conservation policies specifically under that element, just so it's very clear that we'll be taking a look at that. But our agricultural program manager has been working with the Ag Advisory Committee, and we'll be working on some updates as part of the required element update for the periodic update. The other piece of agriculture is that we're already doing some of that through the currently docketed community-driven review of agriculture, and that will be moving through the public review process with the Planning Commission and the board. Starting very shortly, we'll be bringing that to the Planning Commission and then later this year to the board. But that really takes a look at a lot of the other moving pieces, some of the programs that help facilitate protecting agriculture in our county. So it's twofold. We'll take care of it through the comp plan. We're doing some of that now. We'll do some of that with the periodic update. And we're also working on the programs that we need in place to support agriculture in our community.
So agriculture's it's a big vein that's gonna run through a lot of the different topics, not just in the comp plan, but with CPA 16, as Maya just said. And if you look at page 6 of the presentation, item number 3, natural resource lands, that's where ag is gonna be included heavily as the main source in the comp plan, but then with veins running throughout. So we understand that agriculture is a big portion of the topic, and that's where we already know that needs to be included. It's what then we include within those different items that the community is looking for. So we would be engaged with the Ag Advisory Committee. We may continue to be engaged with WCO Extension and the farm community throughout. So building, again, these are the chapters, kind of blank pages, or pages that have already been built. And then we get to edit and revise and update, so.
So then, okay, then I'm confused, right? Because, and the decision requested, we're given certain options, right? But here on page 6, we're seeing kind of all the chapters. And we've touched on the natural resource lands quite a bit for the salmon recovery, for agricultural lands, but it's not kind of included into this area of, you know, the scope of work. So I'm just trying to connect the two and.
So the larger document that describes the scope of work, so all you're seeing is the bulleted, pointed, high-level descriptions.
Yes.
There is a attachment B in your packet of information that has more detail underneath each of these bulleted items. And within the natural resources element, we're looking to update those goals and policies and objectives for consistency with existing plans, state laws, and any court rulings, if there are any. We've added update and revise and or create new agricultural conservation goals with clear measurable policies and metrics for tracking agriculture, as well as review development regulations to ensure conservation in these areas. And natural resources element is a mandatory element that will be opened up.
So page 5
Yes.
of this document.
So then why isn't this, you know, why isn't this requested to be kind of added into the scope of work that the board is?
We're gonna do it.
That,
We've heard that you want that, and it's already part of the required chapters. So with the decision that the board is making is on the optional chapters. Ag and is already included in natural resource lands. We're already going to do that. So that's part of the discussion that's already been had as required. The discussion that we're having now is the optional portion. So ag is already on the list.
And then salmon recovery would be added into the natural land use as a new element, or is just?
it wouldn't be a new element. We would be reviewing our open space and recreation as well as our natural resources element. We do reference many of the plans that are already out there. We'll get with Amy and other salmon leads to make sure that the goals and policies that are currently in there are meeting what the plans are. We need to update those, but we didn't need to put that in the optional list because we're already updating, or we're already required to update those particular chapters by updating those goals and policies and making sure that we're aligning with those other plans that are out there.
We did receive a lot of comments in regards to ag, and I'm wondering kind of what pieces of that are the ones that are going to be included in, or is this just what's gonna be the work that's gonna be done on this? And is this included in the budget that we're?
Included in the budget, yes.
Maya, can you try again on what the agriculture, how we receive that information to build the information in the natural resource chapter? Like what work is going to be done that we're already set to do.
So you explained the CPA 16, which is what Ashley's been doing, and you mentioned as well the Ag Advisory getting involved as well as other stakeholders. But it seems really narrow to me, right? While the comments we got were a little bit even bigger outside the area. And so I'm just wondering, is it still gonna be kind of on this narrow path where we're gonna keep working on that? Or is it going to expand, is my question, right? Is there gonna be that flexibility to expand, or are we just gonna kind of keep on that narrow?
That's helpful. Maya?
Yeah, so the the update to the natural resources section and the agriculture piece is around all of the goals and policies in that chapter. Everything else that would require a broader update, I would say it's fairly narrow, but it opens up all of those policies. It's not a specific policy. We'll take a look at all of it. The metrics for it is another piece that we'll review as part of that. The broader pieces that we would typically ask the board if they want to add those on as optional would be an update to the designation. That's already on the board's plate with CPA 16. So some of those bigger updates that we would typically ask the board if we're going to do, we're already doing them through another pathway. In terms of development regulations and allowing for flexibility in those areas, we're taking a look at that through CPA 16 too. So I don't want to say narrow because updating the goals and policies is a pretty heavy effort if we're opening all of them, which we will with part of the ag update as part of the periodic plan, but kind of the bigger asks we're already working on. So it's kind of a full, this combined with CPA 16 is really a whole look at ag on all of the policy books that we have in Thurston County.
I think to answer Commissioner Mejia's question another way, all of the comments that we received on ag related to the comprehensive plan, we will ensure that we review them also with CPA 16. They don't have to be siloed. So CPA 16 will be the vehicle that will take all the information that the community provided and make sure that we're addressing it there as well.
Commissioner Edwards.
Oh, we don't have near enough time to talk about these things, I can see that, but, you know, if you went to page 19 under the Planning Commission recommendation, and those different elements and chapters that they recommend to open and stuff. But just going back to my request, I guess, that everything have a little bit of a preamble and not so much verbiage to it, I guess, in the end is on that health element. I mean, why not utilize what we have done as the history and that preamble, I guess, because you know, we've got the Nisqually and Henderson watersheds that are showcases with the ecology as to how well we are getting things done. I think Art said we're like at 90% compliance or something in some of those areas, way above what our counterparts are around the Puget Sound. And I just think we can continue to use what we've done as the example moving forward, that we're doing good things, and again, not write a encyclopedia on the topic.
So just for clarification, there's already a body of work and elements that have to be done. And so what you outlined in terms of the optional updates and opening those up are based off of recommendations from the Planning Commission, correct? So the Planning Commission made the recommendations to add these additional ones, and that's the question to the board in terms of, we already have these required elements that we're going to do that will incorporate some of the things we've been talking about. So speaking to Commissioner Edwards' question, is the keeping it simple just doing the required and not adding in the optional? Because the updates were done in 2020 and the updates were done in 2019, at least for the economic element and the health element.
I guess from my perspective, that's the key. Keep it simple, but do it all. I mean, we don't wanna not address some of these issues, but let's keep everything as simple as we can, move forward. I think that shows that we're in the game. I see Commissioner Mitchell.
I had a question for maybe Maya. Are you the one, I mean, who would be best to talk about planning commission?
What's the
Maya,
question?
are you there, Maya?
Yes, yeah, myself or Chris can answer those questions.
So I'm just curious, looking at the health and economic elements, which were a 5-3 vote,
Mhm.
was there a particular argument made? Was it just they're important, we should include everything, or was a more specific nuanced argument made in favor of including those?
There
if
was
you
no
recall?
from what I recall, there was no discussion. The chair asked for up-down vote for each of these
Oh,
particular,
they didn't really hash it
there was no-
through. They
correct.
didn't really get to hear their thought process.
correct.
Okay.
Or laid out like expectations they have. If we look at the health element, do they have specific expectations as a result of looking at it that they want to see? Okay.
That's right, yeah, so, the planning commission as a whole discussed the update, and the, different, optional items, and as a whole, the planning commission, did want to see that whatever elements were opened, our required elements, that they were opened in whole, that we were looking at all the goals and all the policies, which we will be. But what you are seeing there are the yays and nays in a straight up down vote.
And this is a process improvement so that the board can see very clearly what pieces the planning commission is considering. This is a new way that we've done this so that you can see transparently the steps that we took to get here for their recommendation, as Director Walker relayed.
And this was an hour-and-a-half discussion with the planning commission. They took it very seriously.
It is 3:04. I still have questions in regards to the housing, which we didn't touch. Because I think that's one of the most robust ones, and those are the ones where we've gotten more change from the legislator as, and probably will get more changes as the legislator comes to an end. But we're
But we
over
don't
time.
have to worry because
Yeah.
we're
They're already
required to
included.
do
Yeah,
full
so,
blown.
but I kind of wanted to
This
ask
decision point.
the questions on, you know, the implementation process, and what that's going to look like. But 3:05,
Can we schedule a meeting with Maya and Chris?
yes.
Okay.
3:05, we are adjourned. Thank you.